All right, guys, so basically we're starting the integumentary system. The thing you have to remember, this is the first system we're going to deal with. We're looking at all of the organs associated with this. Now, we've just finished tissues, so what you want to recognize is when we deal with this system, we're looking at organs working together to coordinate specific functions. We look at tissues being combined in different ways to form the organs that combine the system. Now, a couple of sides. We're going to first talk about membranes. So when we talk about membranes, a couple things you want to note is functions. We are basically lining or covering body surfaces, okay? We're protecting body surfaces, and we're lubricating body tissues, and all membranes are combinations of tissue. Classification is based on the surface tissue, okay? So these are combinations of tissues. So the first one, obviously, epithelial tissues. So that means the surface tissue is epithelium. Mucous membranes, serous membranes, cutaneous membranes. Now, cutaneous, that's the system we're on now. This is integumentary, okay? Better turn this, okay? Integumentary. Serous membranes, this is what we think of. This is basically our body cavities, and we'll spend a little time on that today. And then the mucous membranes. Mucous membranes we associate with digestive system. You see some mucous membranes in the lungs. You know, the cilia was there to move the mucus up and down. And then lastly, connective tissue membrane, which is synovial membranes. Okay, these are basically, this is what's found in our joints. So we'll talk about synovial membranes when we go into joints and the skeletal system. All right, so body cavities. These, again, we're looking at serous membranes, okay? The thing to remember about a body cavity is, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about the coelums, okay? A coelom is a body cavity. So the coelomate, remember the coelomate, you had the outer, the inner, and then you had this cavity on the inside, okay, that came around. That cavity there is what the fist here is representing. So you have a couple of things you need to know. Here we have the outer balloon, which is parietal. So the outermost part of the cavity is always parietal. You have the compartment or the cavity itself, okay, that's what it's called, a serous cavity. And then the inner wall, this part here that's lining the hand, okay, this is what's known as the visceral. Okay, you've heard of visceral, or your viscera, or to be eviscerated. Viscera refers to the organs in your body. So visceral serous membranes are the membrane that is literally touching the organ. All right. Now, when we deal with this, notice that we have serous fluid. Serous fluid provides lubrication. Okay, a lot of your organs, as you move around, they have to be able to move over and around them. Some of your organs move. Your digestive system is moving. It moves food through it, so it's contracting. Those muscles are contracting. Your heart is often contracting, so it needs to be able to contract and move within that space without kind of sticking. You know how if you touch something and sometimes the liquid there, it kind of helps to hold things. Well, if I have that fluid, it allows it to move over and around things. You don't have friction. You don't have something stopping it from moving, etc. So that lubrication and reducing friction, okay, those are some of the major functions here. All right. And we have some major cavities. Now, when we look at the cavities, what you want to pick up on, especially from this side view, is you can see the major cavities. We have the thoracic cavity, okay, and then you have the abdominopelvic cavity. Now, the abdominopelvic cavity, this is kind of a false separation between. The abdominopelvic cavity is literally all one. There's nothing that divides the cavity into two parts. Unlike the thoracic to the abdominopelvic, the diaphragm literally is between the two, and so you have a physical separation. Now, when you look at this view, this coronal view, notice that within the thoracic cavity, we have the mediastinum. The mediastinum is where we find the heart. Within the mediastinum, we have the pericardial sac. The pericardial sac is a body cavity. The pericardial sac is basically the pericardium. It's what surrounds the heart. So, in other words, you see gradations of these in this area. Then you also have the left pleural and the right pleural cavities. Okay. As you come down, you can see you have the abdominal cavity, and then we have the pelvic cavity. And you can tell here, you can see this dashed line is showing you that false separation. And it has more to do with what's surrounding the area. The pelvic cavity is literally in this area right here, surrounded by the pelvis, within that pelvic region. Now, when we look at the lung, or you look at that, so I'm going to draw a really kind of funky little, here's my vena cavas, and I've got the aorta kind of going out. All right, so this is my heart. Don't mock my heart. All right, so there's my pleural arteries, my pleural veins. Okay, so this is my heart. Now, if I draw my cavity, the pericardium around this, I have a piece of that right here that's literally on the heart. Okay, that's the visceral pericardium. And then I have this area around the heart. Okay, I have the space, which is my cavity, and then I have this outer one, which is the parietal pericardium. Okay, so this is the parietal pericardium. And this one that was right on the heart, okay, that's my visceral pericardium. So you get the idea, all right? Okay, so now let's actually move on a little bit. Integumentary system. Okay, when we deal with the integumentary system, you want to make sure you pick up on basically what we're talking about. It's a cutaneous membrane, so we see epithelial and connective tissues. We have several accessory organs that provide a variety of functions. The point here is all of these. The cutaneous membrane itself, the skin, and the accessory organs all maintain the functions of the skin, okay? Now, primary functions. We're looking at protection, both from mechanical, chemical, bacterial, thermal, ultraviolet, and desiccation, okay? So let's start at the bottom, work our way up. Desiccation, we're talking drying out. Remember, you are predominantly liquid, you're predominantly water. Well, the reason we need that is for a variety of functions. One of the things we talked about in one of the previous case studies you looked at was the need to maintain a certain level of fluid, otherwise you become dehydrated. Well, desiccation, that process, that protection from that is performed by the skin. Second thing, protection from ultraviolet radiation. Well, this is the role of the melanin, or melanocytes that produce it. This is that skin pigmentation that occurs, okay? Thermal damage, bacterial damage, chemical damage, and mechanical damage. This is literally, a lot of this is the function of the outermost level of the skin, and it's just that. Mechanical damage, you know how you can make a fist and your knuckles protrude on your skin, so you can see them sticking out, but they don't escape. It's not like you're Wolverine, right? Chemical damage, bacterial damage, you're looking at, for example, preventing bacteria from being able to get into the innermost environment. Chemical damage, again, same thing, chemicals can't get through your skin. Thermal damage, same idea. You can't, there's a heat that you prevent a lot of things from getting in. It also, guys, don't forget this is also the reverse. It's also keeping things from getting out, okay, especially in the case of desiccation. Aiding in heat regulation, excretion of urea and uric acid, so it has an excretory function, and it's where we begin the process of synthesizing vitamin D. It doesn't end here, but this is that first step in the process. All right, so basic structure, three parts: epidermis, dermis, and then deep is the hypodermis. So you can see here, epidermis, and then as I'm moving deep into the interior of the body, I get the hypodermis. Now, hypodermis, you'll also hear it has other terms. It's basically just that lowest level. Hypodermis is predominantly, that's where you see what we would associate with the basement membrane when we talked about epithelial tissues, but this is where you see a lot of adipose tissue. This is where typically our veins and arteries are traveling through, and you also see areolar tissue. This is where it anchors the skin to the deeper tissues. So when you skin chicken, and you know we talked about that webbing that was the areolar tissue, you're taking off this entire thing right here, which is why usually when you skin chicken, you also remove fat, okay? Now, epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis have specific tissues, specific cells, and actually you end up seeing kind of a separation of some of the functions of the overall system. So first, let's deal with the epidermis. All right, the epidermis has different parts because what you want to remember is when you get out here to this outermost part, these cells are dead. Okay, these cells are literally dead. Okay, there's nothing alive in them. They've completely died. They've completely hardened. They've gone through that keratinization process. There is nothing alive in that cell. That's why they slough off. That's also why they're continually replaced. So we have an active mitotic division here at the base, what's known as the stratum basal, okay, basal, and this is where the cells are actively dividing. Okay, they're undergoing mitosis. Okay, if you don't remember that, do a quick review in chapter 3. This is what's attached to the dermis. Okay, now remember, epithelial tissues are not directly vascularized, so the nutrients and waste removal and things like that these tissues need to function and mitotically divide is diffusing from the dermis. Okay, so we have an active diffusion, apparently I'll spell this right, active diffusion of nutrients and waste to the epithelial tissue from the connective tissue in here. And this is actually dense connective tissue, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Now, notice the names. Spinosum, okay, spiny. Granulosum, they're looking granular. Stratum lucidum is actually, you only really see that in people that have calluses and on your feet. It's not a very thick layer anywhere else in the body. Stratum corneum, okay, which is the outermost layer. The stratum corneum is where we see everything basically fine. Now, what's happening here from the spinosum all the way up to the corneum is we see the keratinization process take place. We see literally chemical and physical changes to the cells as they go further and further away from the stratum basale. All right, so to keep it straight, I came up with a lovely mnemonic for you. Basal, spinosum, okay, granulosum, luteum, and corneum. And so this is literally from deep to superficial. Okay, that's the direction. You are welcome to come up with your own, but you do need to be aware of the layers of the epidermis. All right? Okay, so melanin and skin color. When we talk about skin pigmentation, there are 3 things that contribute: melanin, keratin, hemoglobin. So literally somebody has that ruddy complexion or that red complexion, they have a lot of hemoglobin. They may also have a fair amount of keratin. Keratin is that orange pigment that you get from carrots, you get from yams, you get from different things like that. And keratin also, we associate some of this color from, you might see it with somebody who's undergone jaundice and they turn that yellowing color because we're not removing the uric acids and everything. That's not the same thing, okay? Keratin, it's a completely different thing. So literally, we really are talking about the orange-yellow pigment that gets involved. You can literally turn yourself orange if you eat enough carrots, okay? Now, melanin, we already know melanin. We associate this with every day. If you're African American, you have a lot of melanin. If you are Caucasian, you have very little melanin. So you can see the amounts of melanin changing depending upon location. You can see evolutionary impact, etc. Okay, now the dermis. The dermis is 2 basic layers, the papillary and the reticular. Within the dermis is where we see all of our receptors, all of the sensitivity that we associate with the skin and with feeling and being aware of our surroundings. All of that is found within the dermis. None is in the epidermis. This is also where we see capillaries, which again is going to come back to the that ability of nutrients and waste to diffuse to and from the epidermis while the stratum basale is actively dividing. And then in the reticular layer and going into the hypodermis is where we see the actual capillaries and vessels coming in. That's where they get supplied. Now, almost the most important thing you might say in terms of the papillary dermis, aside from the capillary loops that are up here underneath the dermis, these raisings here are what are responsible for our fingertips. So, I mean our fingerprints. So when you look at your finger and you can see those ridges and that whorls and all of that stuff, that's a direct, what you're seeing is you're seeing the changes and this folding of the papillary layer of the dermis. All right? Now, this diagram's in your book, figure 4-4. You need to make sure you get it in. I expect you guys to know this, and I guarantee it'll be on the test.